I'm just going to say a few very brief words and then bring up my collaborator in this book, Transcendence, the Disinformation Encyclopedia of Transhumanism and the Singularity. I haven't. It's such a long name. I haven't memorized it yet, even though I've been promoting it for 3 months. I'm going to bring him up. I just wanted to say before he speaks, and then I'll say a few words afterwards, that this book is one attempt to popularize transhumanism in a sense. It's an A to Z compendium of technologies, sciences, ideas, personalities, and groups associated with transhumanism and the singularity. Tried to write it in a very accessible way that could be understandable and also very entertaining for a large group of people, including sort of reaching across the aisle in the sense that, yes, transhumanism is pretty weird, and some of the people are kind of funny. So we're reaching out to our audience in that sense as well, and trying to sort of straddle a fine line between being advocates, but also being skeptical and being sort of regular human beings, real human beings, looking at this peculiar thing called transhumanism and the singularity and the stuff that seems to be about to happen in the future, some of the stuff that's happening now, and where it might all be going. So with those words, let me step aside for Jay Cornell, and then I'll say a few words after he's done.
Thank you. Okay. Too many Apple products on this podium.
Can I take away?
Here's yours. Hi, I would like to thank Hank for this opportunity to dispense some friendly but perhaps contrarian advice. This is adapted from a piece that h+magazine published 5 years ago, so I apologize to those of you on memory-enhancing drugs who might find parts of it familiar. I'm calling this version 5 Tips for Techno-Optimists. By nature, transhumanists are all techno-optimists who believe that technology can and will improve human life and that the benefits outweigh the risks. I agree, but it's important to remember that this idea is relatively new in human history. Even today, many people have doubts, and those doubts aren't always unfounded. Transhumanists need to acknowledge those doubts and to answer them. So I've got 5 points that I hope all techno-optimists will remember. Tip number 1, technology will not solve everything. Our belief in technology can lead us to overestimate the benefits. The telegraph allowed countries to communicate instantaneously, so some people thought that it would avoid wars. It did not. Alfred Nobel famously thought that dynamite would make war too terrible to contemplate. Sorry, Alfred. Other people thought that the airplane, the motion picture, television, and the internet might end war. You know, those people were so naive. We're so much smarter than that now. And by the way, won't it be great once the singularity arrives and brings an end to economic scarcity? Tip number 2, beware of unintended consequences. We all know about rogue AIs and gray goo, but the most consequential side effects are often the ones that people failed to imagine. Eli Whitney's cotton gins could process more raw cotton in an hour than a man could in days, and changed cotton cloth from a luxury into affordable clothing for everyone. Unfortunately, the growth of cotton plantations made slaves much more valuable, and the institution of slavery, which was then largely moribund, vastly expanded. Whitney's invention strengthened the South and arguably helped bring on the Civil War. Ironically, at the same time, he invented the American system of mass-produced interchangeable parts, which gave the North a technological advantage which helped them to win. Even a cure for impotence has had unexpected downsides. Viagra has led to a rise in divorce and STDs among the elderly. It may also be bankrupting the Brazilian pension system by leading older men to more often marry younger women, which means more young widows who collect survivor benefits for longer than anticipated. Brazil's province-by-province introduction of television showed that it reduces birth rates. Might not something similar happen with brain-computer interfaces? The birth rate in much of the developed world is already dropped to about the replacement level, and in some countries it's far below that. If the trend continues and the population begins to decline, who's going to be around to pay all those pension benefits, especially if there's a life extension breakthrough and your retirement lasts 50 or 100 years or forever? If that whole post-scarcity thing doesn't pan out, transhumanist tech could lead to both a population crash and an economic one. Tip number 3, the singularity won't be singular. The term implies a unity and compactness that I don't believe the actual event can possibly have. Transhumanist progress, like all progress, will be unfair, at least at first. However, and whenever it happens, it won't affect everyone equally and simultaneously, which means the social, political, economic, and psychological stresses will be tremendous. If you think today's activists are angry about wealth disparities, just wait until some people have computer-assisted intelligence, cancer cures, or immortality that most people can't afford. Which leads us to tip number 4, beware of politics. I'm going to go off script here. One of the interesting things about speaking in the middle of a conference is that other people have said contradictory things just ahead of you. And I'm also speaking, as it turns out, just before a former presidential candidate and a current presidential candidate. So that's just what happens. So with all due respect to Mr. Batten and the political candidates, I would argue that politics is largely a trap for transhumanists. Not that politics can be entirely avoided. As Trotsky said about war, you may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. And while in theory politics is supposed to protect our liberties and improve our quality of life, in practice it too often does the opposite. Certainly don't fall into the trap of believing that your favorite political party is pro-science. All political parties are pro-science when it suits them and anti-science when it does not. Much of politics is just tribalism in ideological form, and so if forced to choose, tribe members tend to dismiss logic and evidence and stick with the myths of their tribe. So I believe that the more transhumanism becomes a political matter, the more it becomes a matter of votes and regulations and taxes and subsidies and lobbying and fairness and centralized bureaucracies. Those things generally do not help innovation. I think it's most dangerous for biotech. Already vast numbers of people are irrationally afraid of the dreaded GMOs. Those people are a ready audience for any politician or bureaucrat who decides to whip up fear. There are lots of people who don't want Monsanto manipulating genes. They're not happy that it happens in university labs. They certainly won't be happy to learn that there are citizen scientists doing the same thing in their kitchens. So remember, kids, keep it safe and don't give anyone an excuse to regulate you or legislate your work out of existence. But even if politicians don't go demagogue, they will still have to choose between transhumanist goals and something else that will buy them more votes. And sadly, on the long list of things that will buy votes, transhumanist goals are somewhere near the bottom of the list. I believe the best hope for transhumanist progress is not to become a political tribe and compete on those terms. The best hope comes from decentralization and liberty, from thousands of individuals and groups, professional and amateur, doing research and sharing information. Just recently, Apple's new research kit that came out with the Apple Watch. It got 11,000 volunteers for a cardiovascular study in one day. Researchers say that would normally have taken them a year. Some are saying that Apple is revolutionizing medical research. On the political side of things, nobody thinks the Food and Drug Administration is revolutionizing anything. It now takes an average of 12 years and of over $1 billion to get something approved by the FDA. Medical advances would happen much faster if everyone didn't have to run their expensive obstacle course. True, it will take politics to fix that, but remember that it was politics that created the red tape in the first place. And finally, tip number 5. Think about what's already here. No doubt transhumanism depends on future technological breakthroughs, but sometimes breakthroughs are right in front of us, unrecognized, waiting for someone to put the pieces together and wonder why nobody had thought of it before. One of my favorite innovations is quite minor, but I think is a great example. Some liquid laundry detergent bottles now come with specially shaped caps and spouts. You pour detergent into the cap, you pour that into the washing machine, and when you put the cap back, anything that's left drips back down into the container and not down the outside of the container. Somebody could have invented this generations ago and nobody did. It's not going to bring in the singularity, but I think it's brilliant. Another example, canned food was invented decades before the can opener. People opened them with a hammer and chisel or with an axe. One final example, this is my favorite. Over 4,000 years ago, people began using carved signet rings to make impressions, to impress symbols into wax or clay. And then at Herculaneum in Italy, you can see a large wooden press with a helical screw that was used as a clothes wringer 2,000 years ago to squeeze water out of clothes. Nobody thought to combine the two and invent the printing press. If the Romans had beaten Gutenberg by 2,000 years, we'd be post-singularity by now. Thank you.
All right, I just want to follow up quickly on what Jay just said. Incidentally, in the book, I rather ridiculed the idea of forming longevity political parties and transhumanist political parties as being tone deaf and not really one of the great populist issues of our times, and not very likely to rise to that level. And, in fact, rather likely to piss people off and irritate them. But I want to take what he said about groups and politics and push it even a little bit further and a little bit more contrarian. Is there a reason or a purpose to be a transhumanist? The research, the development of technology, the scientists, they're out there, they're doing it. They're at Google, they're in universities, they're in companies, they're in garages. Most of them don't pronounce themselves transhumanists or join any groups or come and haggle on Facebook about whether this or that transhumanist has been treated properly or not, or what have you. They're just doing this stuff. So what's the actual, existential purpose of being a transhumanist? Now, is it to convert people to go out there like, any political group or a religious group and convince people that this is the way to go? Maybe it is. Then if that's the purpose, do we effectively do that? Now, when people join groups or movements or ideologies, they become advocates and enthusiasts for that movement or group or ideology. Most of us coming from the outside and viewing those people, usually we don't like them. They're annoying, they're quirky, they're weird. I've been to some extent involved in the radical left for about 40 years, but I've been less involved after about 10 years because I don't really want to go to the demonstration where the guy absolutely thinks he has to wear the Leave North Korea Alone t-shirt, wave the Palestinian flag, walk around with shorts with his knobby knees, and wear all the weirdest possible buttons. And I think this is true of every group, every tribe, every collection. People have their own inner language. People are there to show off for one another. People are there to convince one another that they're righteous and good and so forth. They're not necessarily good communicators of a message outward. So is there a purpose to be a transhumanist? Groups can attract, they can also repel. Now, the other part of this is, I think, actually maybe there is a purpose to being a transhumanist, and there's a purpose for me to write about transhumanism and to offer up transhumanist memes, which I've been doing since the mid-1980s, starting with a magazine called High Frontiers, which became Mondo 2000. And that doesn't necessarily appeal to the masses. I don't think we alienated a lot of people. I think there were just those people who would get it and appreciate it and be really turned on by it. And the rest of the world would rather ignore us. Or the mainstream media had a couple of years where they gave us a bunch of attention, but it was too weird for them to be upset by. They didn't understand it. They just said, oh, here's this far out weird thing. So, to me, I think maybe the great purpose of being a transhumanist and talking about transhumanism and getting together with other transhumanists and being as wild and weird and ridiculous as you want to be, or as down to earth as you want to be, is that it passes that idea on to other people in other generations or in other situations where they might not run into those ideas. And I've had hundreds of people come up to me or email me or whatever over 20 years saying, you know, I got into this because of MONDO 2000. People working in tech and nanotechnology, biotech, art, anti-technology, I mean, just anything you could possibly imagine. But people being active because of the sort of mimetics that we put out there. So maybe the purpose of being a transhumanist is not to try to convert the majority or to run for office or any of these things, but to send that little spark out to the people who will pick up on the spark, and also to have fun because you're thinking about these things, you're feeling these things are interesting and might be valid, and you can get together with a bunch of other people who think these ideas are interesting and might be valid, and you can have a crazy list like the extropian list in the 80s or stuff that's going on on Facebook or Google now, and you can have a great time talking to people about a range of things, you know, from the most practical longevity things that you can do now to the idea of downloading yourself into a computer. So I have no conclusion to this talk.